Paint splatters on screen revealing a series of images, a woman playing violin, then in a bright pink costume, then in a blind skier penny atop a mountain. The paint drip splatters revealing text in print and braille. Unsightly opinions.
Hi, welcome to Unsightly Opinions. My name's Tamara. Today, I want to talk about why everyone is up in arms over Microsoft's new accessible introductions. It's been a little while since we've had an Unsightly opinion on this channel, so I wanted to weigh in, give my 2 cents worth, and share my opinions regarding accessible introductions. I want to start with a little backstory so everybody's up to speed, then talk about what I've heard from the blind community, and then share my own opinions. As always, these are my opinions and mine alone, so if you have a different one, I welcome you to share your opinions in the comments down below. I want to start a conversation because that's how we actually grow as a community and determine what is and is not important. Let's dive in. Every year, Microsoft hosts a conference and workshops for developers, IT professionals, business owners, and other individuals in the community who use Microsoft technologies in their day-to-day. This conference is typically where Microsoft discusses emerging technologies, how to use existing technologies, and allows people to get hands-on with their products. What I've been able to determine by looking at a few of the seminars on their website and what's on offer, I see it as more of a business-leaning opportunity. It's intended for marketing and networking, and less about announcing specific products. What sparked controversy this year is there were additional details added to the introductions. Most conference presenters included details like their name, gender, pronouns, style, hair color, and heritage or ethnic background. I'm going to paraphrase a few examples from the conference. Someone named Vasu Jakal, and I apologize if I'm butchering any of these names, stated, "I am a woman of Indian descent. I have brown hair, brown eyes, and I'm wearing some killer 5-inch heels." Another presenter named Nick Fillingham, "I am a Caucasian male who has a beard and glasses and go by he, him." And after all of these presentations were done, there was a range of reactions. I do want to provide a disclaimer before I get into some of the comments that I've heard from the blind community and some of the things that I think, that I will be discussing topics like ethnicity, gender, pronouns, race, etc. So if any of those topics are something that bother you or you're not comfortable listening to, check back in next time. There was a wide range of reactions from the blindness community and the wider public community. Conservative individuals were claiming that it was overly wokeness by Microsoft. I heard people in the disability community saying that it was virtue signaling. I heard people say that it was ridiculous, that it wasn't necessary, saying that they wish they'd consulted the blind community, which I don't know whether the blind community was consulted prior to including these types of introductions into their presentations. There were a lot of negative comments. I also heard people who were relatively neutral, were completely ambivalent and said it didn't matter, that it didn't take up a lot of time, so who cares, and some people who actually found it helpful. So where do I stand on this topic? Are these types of introductions important to people in the blind and visually impaired community? The answer is going to be yes, no, and maybe. I know that's very clear, but it is a complex topic and there is a lot of nuance to why things should be done some ways and not other ways. And I think it is very situationally dependent on how much detail I as a blind person would want from an introduction. I typically ask people when I meet them if they would introduce themselves by name and give me a reference where I met them before or something that can cue me to who that person is as an individual. For example, if I am working in a large company and I meet somebody named Matt who I met in the finance department, I might ask them, say, "Hey Matt, next time you see me, could you say, 'Hey Tamara,' so I know that they're talking to me, introduce themselves again, 'It's Matt from accounting,' and that way I have a reference point for where they're from, who they are by name, that way I can respond to them by name, and I know that they're talking to me because they've used my name." Oftentimes, after I get to know somebody, I might just say, "No, I recognize your voice. You've got a really distinctive voice. Just let me know when you're talking to me. Hey, Tamara, it's Carol." So I don't need that reference point. It doesn't matter where I'm running into you. And then if I know somebody really, really well, like they're a family member, a close friend, they can just say, "Hey, Tamara," and I'm going to know that they're talking to me and who they are just by their voice alone. So that's how I typically go by introductions. When it comes to additional details, like hair color, eye color, gender, ethnicity, pronouns, it's a lot more complicated. Do I like to know somebody's name? Absolutely. Do I like to know what their role is? Absolutely. That's what I like to hear in a presentation. In a lot of settings, a lot of those other details, at least for me, are not necessary. I will not care what color your hair is. I'm not going to care what ethnicity you are. I don't care what you choose to describe as a physical feature or what you're wearing. Those things don't really matter to me. What I want to know is who somebody is by what they're there to present. These introductions, in my opinion, are relatively harmless because they didn't take up a lot of time, they didn't detract from the presentation. They were 5 to 10 second introductions saying a little bit about themselves. I consider them to be a little bit more like an icebreaker. I don't think it's as big of a deal as a lot of people are making it out to be, and I don't think Microsoft was virtue signaling. I know Microsoft works very hard on the accessibility front, and especially in the last few years has been consulting in the blindness community about how their products can benefit blind people, and they're going straight to the source. I can say that because I have done some consulting with Microsoft. I can't tell you what it's about, but I have done that. So I know that they do go to the blindness community when they have questions about a product in development or they have questions about some of the things that they are doing. Do I agree with everything they do? No, and I'm not going to sit here and say that Microsoft's a perfect company because they're not. But I can appreciate that a company is making efforts to try and be inclusive. And whether it always hits the mark or not, I can still appreciate the effort. When somebody is presenting or when I'm watching a presentation, details like hair color, eye color, ethnicity, clothing choice are not important to me. If I'm going to be engaging with that person at a later date, if I'm going to be talking to them at some point, it can be helpful to include gender or pronouns. I can say that someone's voice can sometimes not match what I would assume to be their gender. I have made mistakes that have been very embarrassing in the past, where I have used the wrong pronoun for an individual. They've been embarrassed, I've been embarrassed, and I like to avoid those situations. So I do think that if somebody says, I'm a female and I go by she, her, or I am a man and I go by he, him, or whatever gender pronouns they choose to use, that can be helpful to me so that I don't make a faux pas later on when I'm speaking to them. And I can say from my end, if I'm not sure what gender someone is, I will try and use gender neutral pronouns until I can figure it out. If I'm not speaking to somebody directly or I will never interact with them directly, that means less to me. I'm not going to try and judge whether somebody's a male or a female when I'm watching a presentation. I'm not going to try and judge what their ethnic background is. I'm just going to listen to the presentation. Do I think there is a place for mentioning ethnicity or ethnic background? Yes, in some circumstances. If somebody is speaking to their ethnic heritage or there is a discussion involving ethnicity or ethnic background, absolutely stating where you're from or what your heritage is important. And it is important for everybody in the room to know that, whether they're sighted or not. And from what I understand is it's not necessarily easy to guess where somebody is from by their physical appearance. So somebody may appear Caucasian, but have Native American roots. Because we have such a complex history and because everyone's experience and racial background is going to be so different, it is important to recognize where somebody's biases are, what somebody's experiences and cultural experiences are, so that we can discuss and come together as a community, not so that we can single them out or presume somebody doesn't understand a racial experience because they don't appear outwardly to represent that heritage. I know that's a significant issue for a lot of people in the albinism community who come from an African American background or an African background, because they outwardly appear white but have the same experience as those who have a darker complexion. And I do think that sharing those details can be beneficial in certain circumstances, but I'm not necessarily going to be there and saying I want somebody's hair color and eye color, because that doesn't matter. And I don't really care what anyone's wearing at any point unless we're going on a fashion date as friends. There was one other point brought up in the conversation on Reddit that I thought was worth discussing, and that is, are these introductions going to be mainstream for everyone, or are we going to be doing them only when we know that there's a blind or visually impaired person around? Because I can understand the awkwardness of feeling singled out in a meeting if everybody's going around and introducing themselves in a particular way just because you, as the token blind person, are there. If introductions like this become standardized, then it no longer feels like singling out or putting all of the pressure on the person who has the visual impairment to either A, identify themselves as being disabled, or B, needing special accommodations and pointing it out all the time, which I personally don't feel I need to do. I only bring up my blindness when it's strictly necessary when I'm out and about. Again, I don't always talk about my blindness or want to talk about my blindness or be singled out as somebody other than a fully capable individual. It's difficult, and I think that if it's normalized and that's the expectation, whether we know that there's somebody visually impaired or not, fantastic. If we're doing it only when we think there's somebody who's blind or visually impaired in the room, that's going to be awkward. So maybe best to avoid that. There was an interesting question that was raised by an individual in the blind community on Reddit, and that was, if these introductions are going to become the norm, if they're necessary, should a person feel obligated to describe the aspects that are visual or perceivable to your average sighted person, or should they be allowed to pick and choose the details that they find important? What this individual brought up was scarring or physical differences. I thought those were good questions to be raising. Should people be forced to make those assertions, and are they allowed to choose what they divulge? Or do they have to share all of their physical characteristics because everyone else in the room can see them, but I couldn't? If these introductions are going to be normalized in society, I don't personally feel that the physical details are important. And if somebody chooses to omit one detail, I don't think that's a problem, but it does create awkwardness for some individuals. If somebody had an accident, I don't feel that they should have to address that accident at every work meeting. If somebody has some trauma associated with part of their physical appearance or part of their gender, I don't think that person should be forced to divulge that kind of information. That should be private, and we should be allowed privacy and the autonomy to decide what we put out into the world and what we keep private for ourselves. From what I've been able to see of the accessible introductions that Microsoft was using in their programming, people were allowed to decide which pieces of information they were giving out. They weren't given a list of here's how to introduce yourself and here's the physical characteristics you have to list. I personally think that it does raise an important question. What is important to you in an introduction? But as always, I'm going to turn it around to you. What do you think is important in an introduction as a blind or low vision person? What are your thoughts as a sighted individual? Does this make you uncomfortable? Let's have a civil conversation, let's discuss differences, and try and create some commonalities so we can understand what is important to most people and what isn't. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. As always, if you have comments, questions, concerns, or video ideas, you can always leave those down below. If you've made it this far, please consider supporting the channel by liking, commenting, subscribing, or engaging in any other way on YouTube or on any of my other social platforms, listed in the description down below. But that's all I have for you today. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.